First, I can start with our land acknowledgement. The University of Washington recognizes the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land that touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands of the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Thank you, everyone, for attending this in-person stock assessment preview. Yes, it's been a while. I'm Tim Essington. I am the newly minted director of the School of Aquatic Fishery Sciences, and I've been a faculty here since 2003. This turns out this marks the 14th time that we've hosted this event, and we co-sponsor it from the school, and also want to acknowledge the College of the Environment that also contributes to the event as well. I think, as all of you know, scientific stock assessment really underpins the scientific process that goes into making management decisions, and particularly those informing things like ABCs that are of great interest to a great many of you in the audience or are online. And as many of you know, within the next week, if I understand the Pacific Fishery Management Council website correctly, the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council website correctly, that the groundfish plan team will be meeting just next week, in part to review these stock assessments and to formalize the recommendations, and that then feeding then into the full council. So with that context, the reason why we host this event really is twofold, relating to both need and opportunity. The need comes from the importance for all people engaged to really have a more detailed understanding of what was the science that went into the stock assessment that is eventually going to feed into this management process to lead to a more transparent and more engaged stakeholder engagement process. And then the opportunity is from us as a state school who likes to think of ourselves as a pretty darn good fisheries program, to be sort of a natural place to bring together the NOAA scientists, many of whom are in the audience, and we'll, of course, we'll hear from Jim, and of course, many of the stakeholders. And do it in an environment where not only can just be one-way flow of information, but also having a reception afterwards where we can have future discussions. So we hope the combination of those two leads to a better informed group of stakeholders that can more effectively engage in the management process, ideally leading to better management outcomes. So with that said, I'm very happy to introduce our star of the show, Jim Iannelli. Many of you are familiar with Jim. We are proud that Jim is a graduate of our program. He got his PhD from here in 1993. He's had several titles and positions since then, all working in sort of similar fields. But he's been at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center since 1991, and then since 2002, he's chaired the groundfish plan team, and he's been he's an affiliate professor at the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences. He's widely renowned around the world as one of the leading stock assessment scientists. He even dabbles in tunas. He's just generally known as the go-to resource and one of the leading people in the field. So we're really fortunate to have him being here to not only talk about the science, but also to sort of break it down in a way that even people like me can digest. So with that, let's give a warm introduction to Dr. Jim Iannelli.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate that. Those super kind words. Yeah, thanks for coming. This is started out, we used to do it at the Alaska Center when I first started doing the Pollock assessment, which goes back to 1996. And yeah, it was lots of new things to talk about and try to introduce people to the things that we're doing now. You all probably know a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, as well as I do, if not better in some cases. But I do want to cover today the bits and pieces that we put in the assessment, and then how we use those data to compare, and then give you some summaries and some highlights in some of the environmental condition work that we're working on here. So just moving into the fishery data, start with the catch. On the lower right here, we have the pattern of total biomass of the catch, the tonnage. And we did have a quota cut from the year before last year. So this year's catch was only just a little over 1 million tons because of conditions last year that hopefully I'll bring home what we saw last year versus what we saw this year. The other thing that's on the upper left panel here is the breakout of catch by sex, and it's only through to 2021 because that's we still only process the age data. That's where these estimates come from, and you see a big increase there in 2021. That's another thing that you'll see is that we did see a lot of small fish in 2021 in the catch, and that's the reason why you see a big increase in number of fish versus the biomass. I mean, there was still, this is the 2021 value, still pretty good catches on the order of 1.37 million tons in 2021. But this year, the catch is just, like I said, only 1.1 million. And so that'll be kind of the theme for today, last year's data and this year's data. But just to give some refresher of how I've been looking at this, looking at the fish conditions, the fishing conditions. Two things you should know: there's an A season and a B season. It's winter and summer. And here, what I'm showing is the trends in the weight frequency of what we observe in individual tows.
Yeah, we give it a little try here. Encourage you to tell. It's back?
Okay.
I fixed it.
The red thing. Thanks, Tim. I got a couple more raised hands here. I can, it's really a little bit hard to field questions. Oh, good now. All right, I can see that. All right, sorry. So we've already gone through what this figure is showing. What I'm going to do now is take the right-hand side, which is where all the action was last year, and look at it in more detail. And this is by year. And instead of the whole season, it's by week. So as you go down each of these panels, it's what sizes of fish the fishery saw by week. So here you can see that the 500-gram lines are still there, and that it's straddling that. And one thing you see that this year the season finished early, and you'll see that throughout. Hopefully that their fishing conditions were quite good. And anyway, that's on the size of fish that we saw. And now moving into spatial pattern by the size of fish. So this figure is somewhat new. Most of you probably haven't seen it. What it is are those same weeks that we saw in the B season. This is for catcher processors, big boats that have generally fish further afar afield than the catcher boats that are shore-based. And what we see is that the weight of those tows, those weeks, generally gets smaller as you go further north. So that where those fish were caught. The mean latitude is increasing. And we see some anomalies there that we see small fish in 2021. That's what's circled at low latitudes, which is relatively unusual. So kind of small fish everywhere would be one of the story to tell there. And then for catcher boats, which fish further south, you see that the mean latitude, those 2021 fish were also the same size, and that's relatively unusual to see those small fish in that region. One of the things I want to do today is try to talk about anomalies. Like when I spend a lot of time looking at these data, and I want to see what's different this year than kind of average. And so I have a new type of figure now that I've been making, and this is, again, the same theme as before. It's the mean latitude of the fishery, of where the fishery occurred during the bee season. This is for one sector, one fleet of the fishery. And now the anomaly, the thing that's constant in all of these are the solid black lines. And so you can see as the week progresses, what latitude did the fishing occur for this fleet? And so the idea is to look at anomalies. So in 2017, the fleet was fishing further south than normal, because normal here is defined by the solid black line, which is the same in every panel. And so again, this year, you'll see it in a map too, the fishery occurred further south than normal. So that's one of the new ways of I'm trying to look at this to see if I can put together a story on it. Another one, this is for catcher boats. Normal is further south because they deliver to shore. And you can see also they're about the same for 2022, but last year they were further south than normal. And then there's years where they're quite a bit further north. And those kind of go with how the fishing occurs, and things like salmon bycatch avoidance also factor in to these types of anomalies. And the numbers here are the number of tows for each of those weeks, just so I didn't go crazy with looking at a small number for those. So that's by latitude. Also, just in general, the pattern, again, the solid lines are the same, the black lines are the same in all these panels. And this is, instead of on the vertical scale, it's latitude, it's mean weight. So I just wanted to see, are they catching smaller fish in general by different years, and how does the pattern change throughout? And this is pretty consistent, pretty flat. It's either lighter or heavier on average for each of the anomalous years. And that was for the catcher processors, and this is for the catcher vessels. One thing you notice is that this is further smaller fish for the people that have to fish further north, and bigger fish for those that fish closer to the ports where they're delivering fish. So you see that between these two fleets and what that looks like. So that's just a kind of a new way of looking at the data that I thought was kind of interesting. But a part of this is one of the parts that go into the assessment itself has to deal with the average weighted age. And that's a figure that I've shown for several years now. And it takes a little bit of explanation now, but here the anomaly is by color. So whether they're lighter given age. So each of the columns are ages of fish from 3 to age 15, I think, or 10. And it's just showing whether they're lighter or heavier than average across time. So you have to kind of think of it. And the three panels here, the left is actual fishery data. The middle one is based on our survey. And so I used the two panels on the left through a random effects model to come up with predictions. And why this is important is because we need to have good predictions for the years where we don't have data on weighted age. All of our assessment models deal with fish in numbers. All of our catches and regulations are in weight, in mass. So we need to have a way to convert the numbers into mass. And getting this wrong is something that happens everywhere and hardly ever is looked at and taken care of. And so feel pretty good about it in this case, and we use it for Gulf of Alaska pollock as well. Anyway, that's a little bit down the data processing side of things. But another way to stick to the theme of anomalies, this is the same type of data as in this previous figure, But now just looking at the final estimate in those panels. And again, here a value of 1 is relative to the mean. And then each of the blobs here, if it's very squat, means there's a lot of information. If it's very vertical, it means we don't have much data on those yet, highly uncertain. And so you could see, for example, this 2017, 4-year-olds coming through the population being lighter than average in some years, and then continuing. And these year classes ended up being quite important in the stock, but they were lighter than average in the data. And so that's just part of that theme. Moving on to what was the forecast like? Well, you just look at the colors. They're pretty, looks like it's going to be pretty average in the near term. But this has a year effect, process error, and a cohort effect. So you do see that pattern of striping across in that. So that the one I was just pointing out was these 2012, 2013 through here, which have the lighter than average trend going forward. That's for weighted age. The other important part is what number of fish that are being caught. And these are our estimates of the fishery catch at age. It looks better on the computer, but the vertical scale here is numbers of fish, right? So I'll just zoom in on the recent pattern, and you see that two things that we don't see very often. We see a lot of 2-year-olds in 2020, which was the beginning of some of the concern that, oh, wow, they're just catching a lot of small fish, and then lots of 3-year-olds last year. And that's something that's pretty unusual in the fishery, and something that propagates through the result. And so keep in mind that we do have data from this for these that are in our surveys. And so that's an important aspect that we'll take into account. And that's just the new data. So turning to the survey data work, that we get 2 charter boats, incredible crew, and lots of new people that are doing a great job collecting data. And this is just a sampling of some of the side projects and focus projects that are being done. One of the important ones for me is this opportunistic Pollock index. You'll see more about that in a second. So these boats go and do basically 20 nautical mile distance apart tows. And while they're transiting those stations, they collect acoustics with modern gear and follow a protocol that's been matched up with our actual acoustic survey research boat. And so those things are important. And then, yeah, there's a ton of other projects they're involved with. And happy to see Gary Stoffer here. He's the architect of this survey. Yeah, one of the things they collect that's important is the environmental monitoring. And one of the really important things that we've been tracking, we've extended further north in our survey. Typically, we had only drawn up to about here. All of these stations are relatively new because of new warming conditions. The take home here is that following a period of very warm conditions, we've seen in the Bering Sea, this year, 2022, was a bit more like normal cold pool extent. And so that has a lot of effect on structuring where fish end up and where they go. It's a product of the survey. One of the things that we do track and use actually in our index now is this thing called the cold pool extent, which is basically just a measure of what the area of that blue swath of water is by year. So you can see we've gone through a period of very little cold pool extent in recent years down here, and now back to average, and we've had some higher cold pool extent. And this is important to track what our surveys actually monitoring on the bottom. So just looking at some of the data so far, you can see that last year we had a pretty broad distribution of sizes of pollock in the survey, and this year a lot more in the middle range of size. But we convert those sizes into ages, and like the catch at age data, we can focus in on the population estimates at age. And so these vertical scales, instead of being catch, are now indexing absolute population numbers. And so the red, I've just highlighted that 2018 year class. We did see them as 1-year-olds in 2019, no survey in 2020. And now after last year, even with that big fishery, the survey, big fishery with lots of 3-year-olds in 2021, we still see the 4-year-olds this year. So that's one of the things that looks like it's going to be a very good event for us. And there's the new data this year. When you integrate out, this is just a smoother through these data points, but these are our biomass data from the bottom trawl survey, and just highlighting this year's point estimate quite a bit up from the last year, and just about average. So not a huge survey estimate, kind of an average, but given that new year class coming in, we think that that'll have a big role moving forward. At least the model estimates tend to make us believe that. So this is the 4 most recent survey years, and now the vertical scale is the catch rate of the tows. So this is what the survey guys do now every year. The standard area is like 376 tows, and then they extend into the Northern Bering Sea. You can see this year they caught some quite close to the Russian border at high abundances. But last year we saw a pretty low level across the board compared to this year, and especially compared to 2019, which was the previous year of the survey. And so these are the data that go into those point estimates. They are analyzed using the vast spatial temporal model, and we use those results into the assessment. So that gives you some idea of kind of what an average year looks like in terms of density. The scale is the same across all these maps, just in that sense. So now if we go on to the other survey, this one hadn't been done since 2018. This is the NOAA ship, Oscar Dyson. Great to see Patrick here. He was working furiously all year, and as long with the rest of the acoustics group at the Alaska Science Center, trying to figure out how to get the survey done. It's really difficult. They have a lot of challenges. They completed a full transect and were able to do some extra work as well, but they were able to get a good estimate that we're using in the assessment. And these are the height of the bars are the echo sign that they see on these transects. So we had to go a little bit wider spacing, but that was to accommodate some of the challenges that we faced with getting the boat to out there and completing the survey. But I really appreciate all the work that went into that. I mentioned, so this is another depiction of those same values. And again, just a silly smoother, but their biomass estimate was up from the 2018 value, sorry, the 2020 value, and quite a bit up from the last time we had an official boat out there. This 2020 number was based on the drone survey where we had uncrewed sailboats that we chartered or paid for to go up from San Francisco and do the survey in 2020. So that's where that data point comes from. And yeah, and so those are the color contours, the density of Pollock on those transects from the previous slide, just shown in a slightly different way. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
What size fish? Yeah, that area there. What size fish were you showing? Was that a lot of juveniles there? No one figured out.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just for people online asking about fish in this region here, which is something I was going to mention, or I meant to mention, was that the fishery didn't really go up in there very much this year. In the assessment document, there'll be maps of where the fishing occurred, and that was a big unusual part of this year. Nobody fished up there. And as far as what sizes of fish we saw up there, I'm guessing they were probably the size of the 2018 year class, but maybe Stan or someone that was on those legs. Stan, did you cover that leg? You were.
They go like 4 years old.
Yeah. So good sized fish next year, Pat. Patrick?
One more time. The rookie didn't say, where's the weight? There were a lot of fish that fall, things up. You know, and then you do a number. And then things up. And then as we reach that need, we install our fleet.
Yeah, just thanks for industry people that tried to help us get the survey underway. Appreciate all the help getting that going. So this is another from the acoustic data. This is preliminary 2022 age composition data. So here, the Age and Growth Lab really hustles to get the samples from the bottom trawl survey back in the lab, age them all, you know, on the order of 2,500 fish, and give me a good estimate from the bottom trawl survey. Those same data can be used for the age length key for the acoustics. They're not directly or sampled exactly the same, but converting from sizes of fish that the acoustics group measured to ages using the age length key from the bottom trawl is something we've been doing it that way for, well, pretty much since I've been doing the assessment. And next year, these estimates will be revised with only acoustic collected age data. But this year, that was that's the way it goes this year. The age and growth was able to get one batch of otoliths done, and next year they'll complete the second batch from this. So that's two surveys, the bottom trawl and the acoustic, big ones, heavily staffed. And one of the things that the acoustics and the groundfish group been able to coordinate is collecting those acoustic data. I mentioned the 20 mile stations. They're collecting acoustics as they transit between the stations. And then, so what they did was match what the acoustic boat did on the bottom here with what the survey boats that aren't doing acoustic surveys saw on their echo sounder, and were able to come up with a way to index them. And that publication led by Taina Hokoleto was something that we've been using since 2006. And these are the results this year from that survey. It did come up to be one of the highest values in this time series of indices. And here, instead of being transects, you can get the idea that they're transiting between trawl stations. And again, the color coding here is density of pollock. And so to Tim's question, we again see they saw a lot in the midwater up in the northwest there as well. So that's curious. We also, I redo this map just to try to cover it as well. This is the same data again, but with a slightly different map showing that a lot of those fish were up in the higher northwest region there in the index. So what have we seen so far? Pretty good indications, kind of average, above average, and way above average for the three indices. And this is in contrast to last year, where we thought things were looking down quite a bit. And spawning biomass was below target last year and projected to be about at target. And that affected our quota. But just moving on now, we could just look at how the model fits the data. And so this is that same time series from the bottom trawl survey showing the synthesized vast spatial temporal model, which includes areas that aren't surveyed in specific years, and also includes the Northern Bering Sea segment, which had some big increases in the recent period. So that's the model fit to that. And generally speaking, I like to show, this shows two things. It's the same data, just plotted slightly differently. But here the dots are the survey estimates that came out of the VAST model. And so they're slightly different. And the lines are my model's estimate of fitting those survey estimates. So the red is shown as this year's base model, and the cyan or whatever color that is last year's model estimate and survey estimates. No, but we do have some because there's a little time-varying selectivity in the survey. So effectively, Q is fixed, but it's affected by the slight changes in catch selectivity for the bottom trawl survey. Fitting to the acoustic trawl data, this is showing that fit. The model is shooting just above that slightly, partly because it cannot do well at fitting this huge trend increase as we see in the acoustic vessel of opportunity index. So these are just the index fits. Next, I'm going to move into the age fits. And so these are the same data now are in the bars, plotted a little bit differently. Their proportions and by each year. And then the lines with the dots are the model fits to those proportions. And you can see in the data, the proportions have a very clear cohort pattern. A year class comes in and it persists in the fishery. There are some unique things that we've looked into. This 2012 year class comes through, then the 2013 comes in after and actually takes over as being the dominant one. And so here is that 2018 year class in the fishery. Let's see if it occurs in the survey. And this is the full time series of the survey data, same configuration. Some of the color coding at the very end here is off a little bit because of 2020 was no survey, but you do see again, the same type of pattern of year classes moving through the population, and the survey is doing a pretty good job of tracking them. And for the midwater trawl survey, we see that the data really predominate being 4-year-olds this year. It starts at age 2. But the data were more than the predictions. So that's part of the trade-off through time in these plots. What? Those are predicted 2-year-olds. They do not fit well, yes.
Technical service, that sucks.
Yeah. Very technical. So you put these data together. What do we see last year in the green color? We saw things trending downwards, actually below kind of the target biomass level. And this year, things are the upturn. And so, like I do almost every year, I try to see, well, what data is driving that? And almost everything we added. So last year is the red line without any new data, just rolled forward with catch. And then adding in 2021 catch at age data brings things up a bit because of those abundant 3-year-olds that we saw in 2021. Then adding the bottom trawl survey is the BTS, is the green. And then adding the acoustic trawl survey goes up a little bit. And then finally with the AVO data, that goes up again. So those are the kind of the breakout of adding incremental data to it. And bottom line is that this year compared to last year, we see a much higher 2018 year class. These are 1-year-old recruits. Big change there. And so this is what the time series estimate is. And I just want to, I'm really glad Gary Stauffer's here because I remember this is all these year classes that were big are very intimate. They're like really important to your life, it seems like. And I remember these year classes. Well, 78 was a little bit of a stretch. It was kind of prehistory, but 82, I remember really well. 89 was like a classic. It kind of evolved the whole Bering Sea. 1992 is a story though, because I remember Gary said, you should take over the assessment because we're not seeing any new fish coming in. And I did in 96, and all the data up to then was there's nothing coming in, stock is going down, things are going to go crazy. And so Gary said, yeah, it's nuts. There's not going to be any fishing. The fishery is going to collapse. And so what happened was 92 actually showed up as 5-year-olds. and then 6-year-olds even more, 7-year-olds. And that was kind of an interesting story, and one that is part of the story for the Bering Sea and the way Pollock are, and probably due to where they're residing, how much they move between regions and that kind of thing. And then these other year class, 2008 was really great because that brought us out this period through the middle here. We had some big quota cuts from like 1.4 million down to 800,000 tons in a couple of years. And that was a pretty big crisis back then due to these poor year classes in the mid 2000s. And now we get this monster one that I can't believe that it's that big. And so what do you do when you can't believe stuff? Thanks to Jim Thorson, he reviewed the document and said, you should do a profile on that. And so like, I actually put the code in and did my own profile of the 2018 year class, just to see what data components were affecting those estimates. And as you might imagine, the age data, they're all the ages combined. I didn't split them out just for simplicity, drive most of it, the total likelihood, and then that ABO index not being fit very well with the big increase wants that year class to be even bigger. So these are the trade-offs. Sorry? Yeah, the three main sources.
So it's not like ABO is the age data?
No, there's no age data for ABO. So it's an index and it assumes the same selectivity as the acoustics survey. Anyway, these are kind of technical plots, and sorry, I'm going to go into even more technical thing in the next slide, mostly because I don't know how to interpret it. So I'm hoping Andre can help me here. So that's a profile over the 2018 year class. I also do Monte Carlo MCMC runs of a full posterior distribution. And I get everything out I want, or anything I want out of it. And so what you can do is take the posterior distribution of the 2018 year class, which is shown in the horizontal scale here. And then it's a similar trend or similar idea to the profile, but it's not a profile. I'm not quite sure what to call it. But what it is I subtracted off the mean negative log posterior from each of these components so that the scales could be the same. And I think the way to interpret it is that, yeah, you see the same thing with the ABO, and the age data now are split out, just showing the two main ones. Yeah, fish age are in there too, just to see some of the trade-offs there. But anyway, it's just kind of an experimental thing, and something to think about. Maybe someone will figure out whether that's a valid way to do it or not. But what is valid for sure is to look at how much the 2018 year class affects the spawning biomass next year. And that's what's shown here. On the vertical scale is what we conserve in our management system. And we want it to generally for fishing conditions and otherwise be above 2 million, which in this scale would be the bottom there. So it's going to be well above the 2 million ton kind of target, 2.3, I think it is for females. And then on the horizontal axis is the uncertainty of that year class. And so those are just marginal distributions on either side of that. So that just shows that, yeah, there has a big influence on what happens. If we get a snow crab event and they disappear, then I'll be up here telling a different story next year, if I make it that way. But so that's a couple things on that. What's another way to look at how well we can say something about a year class? I mean, obviously next year we're going to want to know, is this estimate of the 2018 going to change a lot with new data? It usually does. And one way to test how much it changes is to look at a retrospective pattern. And so this will just cycle through forever. And so I get to talk about it for, I think I gave myself 3 minutes on this slide because it does take a bit of explanation. So the shadow for the full time series, too bad it's not as bright. It looks really good on my screen. The shadow behind it is the assessment model this year. Those are the estimates that we get. What we show, let's just focus on the left-hand side for a minute. What we see there, the shadow, hopefully you can see the pattern. That's this year's estimate. That as we progress, I've wound it back and said, take away all the data back to, what is it, 2002, 10 years ago. And what were the estimates and how did they evolve as you add each year of data into that model? And so that's what I'm trying to show. And you can see that there's a lot of years where the assessment gives a pretty different answer. And you see that last year was really different. So that's kind of the retrospective pattern and how we judge our models as being good or bad. It's heavily driven by data. Obviously, we're dropping out data as we progress through these. So that's on the spawning biomass side. Now for the story for recruitment, same idea here, but what I want you to focus on is this two things. This year class, as it starts to, early one, starts out now, it's only about, it looks like 55,000 or whatever, 45,000, 45 billion, sorry. But you can see as time progresses, it goes way up and then it comes down to where it is. And so there's a lot of variability through time in each assessment. Likewise, on this 2012, watch how high this one gets. And then it ends up adjusting downwards as you add data and new information. And so the point of this is to say that, do we believe this big estimate? It's great that it's there, but I don't expect it to stay as high as it is. Hopefully it will, but given history, things can change as you add new data. And so whether this would, yeah, so that's the nub of my depiction of retrospective. The result is, this is what we're faced with. Last year, we said spawning biomass was trending downward. Hopefully it will come up, and it certainly did quite a bit. And that's a good thing for a lot of reasons. One of the things that we have in our control rule is that when you drop below this 2.3 million tons of female spawning biomass, our control rule presently says you have to lower fishing mortality really quickly. So it's a fast down. And then what we did back in the day was pretty slow up. And so whether that's a great fishing strategy or not is something that probably needs more evaluation. One of the things that we're going to look at in the coming year are something that's a little more ballpark, and actually I think we should focus a little bit more on, what should we be increasing effort a lot to take new catch? In modern stock assessment in the US, I think we fail to talk about what it takes in terms of effort to take a quota. We generally say, oh, we can double the quota because our assessment model allows that, but we don't say anything about how much effort it takes to do that. And so this is just a thing, and I put in the document this year. It just says, what if you just fished that kind of recent years effort levels? And these are again, thousands of tons type of level that you would anticipate with that. And then this is the type of spawning biomass that you would anticipate with that. And the reason I think this is great, and probably the reason why our system has worked so well, is that at such kind of, these are about what the catches have looked like historically, and this is what the biomasses look like historically as well. So it's been really good. We have not ventured very often into this below target levels, which is the case where you would really start to ratchet down fishing mortality rate, which is a pain. I mean, difficult. So that's all I had on the assessment. I got a few more slides I'd like to show just on general patterns of data and shifts in pollock distribution. It's a big topic for the fishery and kind of internationally with climate change. Do we expect more pollock to be in the Russian waters, and how much of that is increasing through time? And so what I've done here is just look at the latitude of the mean biomass as a function of time. It's going further north in the recent period. We go back to that cold pool. We can see that as a function of through time, but it's also a function of the cold pool as well. And so here, as the cold pool recedes, you see the center of gravity go further north. So this now is the extent of the cold pool, lots of cold pool, little cold pool, more fish further north. So that's part of some of the AgClimb project that's underway at the Alaska Center. And we, we continue to look at some of that cost trade-off. And I just wanted to touch on a little bit on the fishing conditions are impacted by these. In addition to environment, they're also impacted by management measures. They've been hit hard with salmon bycatch restrictions in recent years. Even herring has affected the quotas, or not the quotas, but the places they're allowed to fish. So they have to compete with a lot of different activities. And then let's see, I do have some discussion on Chinook salmon work that just happened this last summer. In terms of the bycatch, we evaluated the impact of the Pollock fishery on Chinook salmon bycatch, or on Chinook salmon runs. And so this is involving genetic work where these are the time series of the adult equivalent mortality by all of these genetic regions. And what we did was combine that, account for how many fish are going to die at sea, what ages they were caught in the Pollock fishery. And we found we can compare, given run strengths back to Western Alaska rivers, what the impact rate is on the Pollock fishery on those runs. And for combined Western Alaska, it's been on the order of 2%, meaning that if there had been no Pollock fishery over this period, there would have had a 2% increase in salmon returns based on our estimates. As far as the upper Yukon, that percentage is less than 1% on average. And I think that's all I have to say. I've got a couple of slides, but on Chinook salmon. Oh, not all I have to say. I'll skip to the really cool stuff that is being advanced. And some of you may have remember that Alex de Robertis had done a couple of experiments already with these moored echo sounders that are on the seafloor. And here they placed them on 4 locations close to the Russian border. And what they have in them is a bunch of instruments, including echo sounders that turn on and look upwards. And they were able to, using split beam, actually follow targets of fish swimming by the echo sounder. And because they're targets, they can actually tell how big they are. And so we haven't got the full story yet, but the early indications are that they're able to tell what direction the fish are moving during part of the year, what direction they're moving coming back, and how much difference there are in over a whole year in the size of fish. And so this is some exciting work that they'll be hopefully working up in the coming year. And I just wanted to put a plug in for that technology feat. I'm looking forward to that. And then, yeah, just the other aspect, I don't know if Patrick or I see Sandy's here too, but we did this sail drone work, but now they have this basically a motorized device that'll be able to go and cover areas much more efficiently. And that's something else they're working on. And that's all I have. Thank you.
So we have time for questions, and we'll want to field questions, both people in the audience and online, which means we need to figure out how to access the questions online.
I could probably do that.
So let's chat.
No open questions.
No open questions. Okay, so we get to just deal with the in-person questions for now.
Ray.
An hour and a half ago, we saw that they on crab population, we had a big survey in a long time, and then they all disappeared. Any thoughts on whether that's the risk of Pollock as well?
Well, I mean, we've seen it before that we've seen changes. Obviously, predation is a big impact. That figure that showed the 2 strong year classes together, it started out as one big one, and then it kind of devolved into 2, and they're about the same size. That's unusual because the reason, at least my thinking and what I was indoctrinated with, was that it's unusual to have 2 strong year classes next to each other because 1-year-olds like to eat zeros and 2-year-olds 1-year-olds. And so it's like if there's a lot of 2-year-olds out there, they're cannibalistic, they'll eat 1-year-olds. far as the 2018 year class, I had discussions with colleagues in the food habits lab, and they're looking at, there's been apparently very little cannibalism on that year class for whatever reason spatially. But as far as to answer your question on, you know, their life history is way less complicated than crab, I think. And you know, we've seen strong year classes in our data become much more moderate, but we haven't seen like disappearance. So.
On the crab data, is there any similarity back to what happened in 1970, 89, 80 when it was crashed from 100 million pounds? The same thing overnight. There has to be, right? I mean, the crab population has never been that high since. And those disappeared at a much higher level completely. Is there, so, is there any data like the coal pool? You know, what is there any comparison? Because that was really massive.
Yeah.
That was fishing mortality was quite high. King crab as well. Fishing mortality was pretty high on the rains back in those days. Well, obviously, you're not a certain what was going on.
One of the first seminars I went to at UW was with Don Bevan, and he said that it wasn't fishing, it was environment. And in 70, I mean, you know that, but during that period, we do think there was, for example, a regime shift, you know, gadded outburst kind of thing. The extent that I don't think we have a smoking gun, whether that's fishing or environment there. But yeah.
One of the things we saw this year was right away the oil content of fish was very high, which indicates much bigger krill situation. I'm sure you saw in the survey. And the coal pool was very profound on where the fish came. It was really cold. It was down to 0.8. You know, just in a matter of months. It was quite a bit different. And how do you think that would affect the survey versus last year where it wasn't consolidated? Do you think there's any similarities that it's corralling fish a little more?
So I don't know if, yeah, Fondline people heard that the oil content of fish this year seemed to be quite good, and the question was, you know, is it the krill situation? And we do have reports coming out of our ecosystem chapter, and I think it's even in the document talking about the importance of different size copepods and krill available to Pollock that affect their feeding, and the extent that is linked up with the coal pool is obviously also really important. And we do have another question: Do Pollock eat young ray king crab as larvae or recruits? And I think, well, I don't know about ray king crab. I did look for snow crab, and apparently Pacific cod can eat a lot of snow crab. You know, in some documents that I was just looking up last hour, on the order of 150,000 tons of snow crab per year, at least expanded out from our diet data, given those assumptions. But as far as pollock go, they don't appear in the diet data to be very important in the diet, either as larvae or that I know of, but maybe. Yellowfin sole do eat a lot of small crab. Mike?
Last year, your ABC revenue more than your model number because you had a whole series of things you were worried about. You got anything to worry about this year that would make you want to recommend a number lower than the ABC from the model?
So yeah, so just to reiterate, the last year was lower than the maximum permissible. But the reason that I picked the number that I did was it said, well, given these declines, let's not increase effort. And that was the rationale for picking that lower number last year, was the projections were to say that if you would have to push harder to get that ABC. And so obviously we're not going to go over 2 million tons total. And I do have a recommendation for something more like those last sets of figures. It's more like average fishing mortality, just because I don't want to go below the target like we did back then. You know, that seems to have been real given the accumulation of data that we have now. And I think until we come up with a better system, that so the short answer is I recommend something lower than the maximum permissible, but it's well above anything that would be within the 2 million ton cap. So
I'm not going to ask the question up front here, but I do have a couple of thoughts and queries. You've got, normally you show us the stock food relationship, and you did it this year, and I was wondering, I'm guessing the answer is no, but you've got big recruitment from the lower biomass and whether that has any impact. But the other question I had was that these seasons seem to be the shortest since at least the last, what, 20 years or so, 10 years? And the age data being so informative for the recruit estimate, whether there was anything there. There it is. Doesn't seem to bend over quite as much.
no, I just, it's in my document.
Yeah. Everyone gets the figure 61. But what about the season being really short and the dependence of particularly the recruitment estimate on the fishery age prompt data, whether there's anything that, I mean, I just don't have a sense of how the fact that you're getting all your age data from the beginning of the bee season might affect the age data that goes into the assessment. Just because it's such an anomalous year compared to everything you've seen before.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. You know, for those that aren't aware, we have a couple of regularities, things that are very constant in the fishery. You know, they only can catch up to now 45% of the quota in the winter, and the rest is in the summer season, summer, fall season. And generally speaking, you know, it's that point is worth looking into, but it also makes me think that in 2020, during the pandemic year, fishing occurred much later than normal. A lot of boats didn't get out there at the same time they would have preferred to avoid salmon and other things. And yeah, so those are really good points, and I haven't looked at that specifically. I did, when we were doing the salmon bycatch work, I did look at like what the ages, how they differ within a season, like if you dropped off a whole month, that kind of thing. But yeah, it'd be something to look at.
The way the fishery went during the bee season, the reason that might be some of that happening was as you move north and you hit that cold water, the fish size immediately dropped. And so everybody put the brakes on.
That's why you didn't go north?
That's why. And so it was very profound. You could just go so far, and that was it. And it shifted a little bit as you know, it shifted the cold pool a little bit, but it was very profound. And that's why nobody kept going north, because you know, that's so that
is that just size or oil company or other?
Yeah, you heard about the 40 miles based on survey versus 20 miles. Is that having any kind of error?
Yeah, you know, Patrick could speak to it too, but the yeah, it did increase the uncertainty a bit over what we would have got with the 20-mile spacing. But you know, we did the 40-mile with the sail drones, and I think we did look at that quite extensively. Like, how much did things change? Like for the sail drone and known 40 miles, we looked at, you know, historically, what if you drop every other transect, which is effectively 40 miles, and you know, it was surprisingly insensitive to those factors. Patrick, I don't know if you want to say more.
Yeah, no, you got it. Again, we're thinking about, you know, finding spaces which is identification, but I think we're confident based on analysis of data that this would sort of be an acceptable level of precision. And then we did do something at the end of the survey, we cut process and it's coming back to kind of look at what is in between. And I think that was also supporting that idea of the, you know, what we think of scale very as expected. You know, the reduction in precision, but within acceptable and understood.
Another question. Well, last year you're talking about the factor and officially concerned that with scanning, I think you used the word. This year is getting more robust
But, yeah, so the analysis on weight given length, it still shows skinny fish, but encouraging is that the actual average weighted age is about average, it looks like, in the new data. So yeah, we do there still seem to be skinnier than average, but not as skinny. Makes sense.
The process would happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's been an hour, so I will suggest we maybe start this part of the event. Start the second part of the event. And the second part of the event is food and wine.